The notebook cost her everything. 7 composition notebooks filled with her dead mother's handwriting, the only proof that the woman who raised her ever existed. And she gave them away. All of them. To a boy she barely knew. A 10-year-old foster kid who couldn't read his own name, sitting in the back of a dying library in a dying town, and she handed him her entire inheritance because she decided his future mattered more than her past. She was 11 years old, she had nothing else, and she gave it all away. 22 years later, that boy walked into a town hall meeting worth $47 million. She was sitting in the 3rd row. Neither of them knew the other was in the room, and what happened next is one of the most extraordinary reunion stories I have ever come across. Before we get into this, welcome. Wherever you are watching from right now, whether it is late at night or the middle of your day, drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you are new here, consider subscribing. Stories like this one are exactly what this channel is about. Now let me take you back to the beginning, not to the reunion, not to the money, to the town. Because you cannot understand what Grace Holloway did unless you understand where she came from. Brenton, Pennsylvania. If you have never heard of it, that is the point. Most people haven't. It sits in the western part of the state, tucked into a valley along the Allegheny River, surrounded by hills that were green once, and forests that were thick once, and a steel mill that employed 4,000 people once. For 3 generations, the Allegheny River Steelworks was Brenton. It was the first job and the last job. It was the reason houses were built, the reason schools stayed open, the reason families planted roots and expected those roots to hold. Grandfathers worked there, then their sons, then their grandsons. The mill was not just an employer, it was an identity. And in 2001, it closed. 2,000 jobs gone in a single quarter. Not gradually, not with warning, just gone. The furnaces cooled, the gates locked, the parking lot emptied on a Friday afternoon and never filled again. By 2003, Brenton was hollowing out from the inside. Boarded storefronts lined Main Street like missing teeth. Foreclosure signs appeared on every 3rd house. And families packed their cars in the middle of the night and left without telling their neighbors because there was nothing left to say. The people who stayed were the ones who could not afford to go. The ones with no car, no savings, no relatives in another state willing to take them in. They stayed because leaving costs money, and money was the one thing Brenton no longer had. Among those who stayed were the Holloways. Dale Holloway had been a mill supervisor for 14 years. Good job, steady paycheck. The kind of position that let you believe the future was a straight line. When the mill closed, Dale found work at a distribution warehouse 40 minutes east. Back-to-back shifts. He left the house before his daughter woke up and came home after she was asleep. Some weeks he did not see her at all. He was not a bad father. He was a broken one, a man trying to hold the edges of a life together after the center had been ripped out. Because the mill closing was not the worst thing that had happened to the Holloways. Not even close. 18 months before the mill shut down, Dale's wife Catherine died of cervical cancer. She was 34 years old. It was the kind of cancer that gets caught early if you have insurance, if you have a doctor you see regularly, if you live in a zip code where the nearest clinic is not 45 minutes away. Catherine Holloway had none of those things. By the time she felt the pain, it was too late. By the time they found the money for a specialist, it had spread. She died in a hospital bed 60 miles from home, while her daughter sat in the hallway reading a book because the nurses said the room was for family only, and an 11-year-old did not count. Dale held Catherine's hand. Grace held a book, and that was how it ended. After Catherine died, her things stayed exactly where she left them, her reading glasses on the kitchen counter, her cardigan draped over the back of a chair, her coffee mug in the dish rack, unwashed, because Dale could not bring himself to wash it, and Grace understood why without being told. But the most important things Catherine left behind were her notebooks. Dozens of them. Composition notebooks. The kind you buy at the drugstore for $1, black and white marble covers, wide-ruled pages. Catherine Holloway never went to college. She never finished high school, in fact. But she was the most curious person her daughter ever knew. She read everything she could get her hands on, library books mostly, and she wrote down everything she learned. Vocabulary words, poems she loved, passages copied from Emerson and Maya Angelou and James Baldwin, observations about her own life, about the town, about motherhood, about what it meant to be a woman who wanted more than the world was offering. Every notebook was a conversation Catherine was having with herself, a record of a mind that never stopped growing even when every circumstance tried to keep it small. Grace read those notebooks every night. She would lie in bed with a flashlight, turning pages slowly, hearing her mother's voice in the handwriting, the loops of the letters, the way Catherine underlined words she thought were important, the way she starred certain phrases and circled others, as if she were building a map of what mattered, and one line appeared in almost every notebook, underlined, starred, circled, written in Catherine's careful hand. The only thing worth leaving behind is someone better off because they knew you. Grace read that line hundreds of times. She did not know yet that it would become the most important sentence of her life. She did not know that it would cost her everything, and she did not know that it would save a boy she had not yet met. Grace Holloway, at 11 years old, was the kind of child the world overlooks. Not bullied, not popular, not troubled enough to trigger concern, or gifted enough to attract attention. She existed in the invisible middle, the place where quiet children go when no one is watching. She had no close friends. She ate lunch alone at school, reading while the other kids talked and laughed around her. She walked home by herself through streets that got emptier every month. Her teachers forgot to call on her in class, not out of cruelty, but out of the simple human tendency to notice what is loud and miss what is still. Grace was still. She had her mother's eyes, though, brown and watchful. The kind of eyes that noticed things other people walked past. A crack in a sidewalk, a dog tied up too long, a boy in the back of a library who was fighting a book like his life depended on it. Now, let me tell you about that boy. Because his story starts somewhere else entirely, and it starts in a place that most people would rather not look at too closely. Nathaniel Carter was born in Philadelphia to a woman named Denise who loved him more than she loved anything in the world, and who never had a fair chance at the life she deserved. Denise Carter was 23 when Nate was born. She was fleeing a violent partner, a man whose name does not matter because he contributed nothing to this story except fear. She took her son and ran. For 2 years, they bounced between shelters, sleeping in rooms with strangers, eating meals served on plastic trays, learning to be invisible because invisibility was safety. Then Denise got clean, got a job, found a small apartment in Harrisburg. For the first time in Nate's life, he had a bedroom, a door he could close, a refrigerator with food in it that belonged to them. Denise was 27. She was winning. And then, without warning, without mercy, without the kind of medical care that might have caught it in time, she had a stroke, undiagnosed hypertension, no regular doctor, no insurance. She was 29 years old. She died on the bathroom floor while her son was at school. Nate was 8. Think about that for a moment. Think about being 8 years old and coming home from school and finding your mother on the floor. Think about the silence that fills a small apartment when the one person who made it home is gone. Think about what that does to a child's understanding of the world, of safety, of whether it is worth loving anyone at all when everyone leaves. Nate entered the foster care system the same week his mother died. 2 years, 3 placements. The first family said he was difficult. What they meant was that he barely spoke, and they did not know what to do with a child who stared at walls and flinched at loud sounds. The second family returned him after 4 months. They said they were overwhelmed. What they meant was that he was not the kind of child who made fostering feel rewarding, and they wanted a child who smiled. The third placement was the Dunlops, and the Dunlops were the kind of foster parents the system creates when it stops caring about quality and starts caring about numbers. Frank and Sheila Dunlop lived in Brenton, Pennsylvania. Frank was a former mill worker who drank too much and said too little. Sheila was indifferent in the way that people become indifferent when they have spent years doing something they never believed in. They had fostered 11 children in 6 years. None stayed long. The Dunlops did not abuse their foster children, not in the ways that make headlines. They simply provided the minimum: a bed, food, a roof, no warmth, no conversation, no interest in who these children were or what they needed. The state sent a check every month. The Dunlops cashed it. The children came and went. This was the arrangement. Nate arrived in Brenton in September of 2003. He was 10 years old. He was black. And Brenton was a town that had almost no racial diversity. A place where everyone knew everyone and strangers were not welcomed, they were watched. Nate was stared at in the grocery store, whispered about at school. He was the only black child at Brenton Elementary, and the other kids did not know what to do with him, so they did what children often do with difference. They avoided it, or they pushed against it. Nate was shoved in hallways. His backpack was knocked off his desk. A boy in gym class called him a name that does not need to be repeated here. Nate did not fight back. He did not react at all. He had learned a long time ago that reacting was dangerous, that showing you are hurt only invites more hurt. So he sat in the back of every classroom, said nothing, handed in blank worksheets, stared at his desk. His teachers assumed he could not read. They were half right. Nate could read, slowly, painfully, with immense effort, but he had severe dyslexia that had never been diagnosed. Every word on a page swam. Letters reversed themselves. B became D. Was became saw. Lines jumped. Sentences scrambled. Reading for Nate was like trying to assemble a puzzle while someone shook the table. He could do it, barely. But it took so much concentration that after 10 minutes, he was exhausted, and after 20, he wanted to scream. No one had ever tested him. No one had ever sat with him long enough to watch how his eyes moved across a page and realized that the problem was not intelligence but processing. Instead, by October of 2003, Brenton Elementary had labeled him behavioral problem, likely intellectually deficient, recommended for special placement. These words went into a file. The file went into a cabinet. The cabinet was in an office where no one looked at files unless something went wrong. And nothing went wrong because no one was paying attention. So Nate did what he always did. He disappeared. After school, he walked through the empty lots where houses used to be, past the rusted mill with its broken windows and sagging roof, along the river where the current was slow and brown and indifferent. He walked until his legs were tired and the sky was getting dark, and then he went to the one place in Brenton that was warm and quiet and where nobody yelled, the Brenton Public Library. It was a crumbling Carnegie building, the kind of library that had been beautiful once, with arched windows and carved stone, and the name of its benefactor etched above the door. By 2003, the carpets were stained, the fluorescent lights buzzed, half the shelves had gaps where books had been lost or stolen or simply fallen apart. But it was open until 7 in the evening, and the heat worked, and the librarian, a woman named Mrs. Alderman, just did not ask questions when a 10-year-old boy sat alone at a back table for hours, doing nothing but staring at a book he could not read. That is where Grace first saw him. A Thursday in mid-October, she was in her usual corner, reading from the shelf where her mother used to bring her. She knew every spine by sight. She was halfway through a novel when she looked up and noticed the boy at the back table. She had seen him at school, in Mrs. Weber's class, the quiet one, the one nobody talked to. He had a book open in front of him, a children's chapter book, maybe second grade level. And he was staring at it the way you stare at a locked door when you know what you need is on the other side, but you cannot find the key. Grace watched him for 20 minutes. She watched his lips move and stop, watched his finger trace under the words and lose its place, watched him turn the same page back 3 times. Most kids who could not read just closed the book and walked away. This boy kept going back. He kept trying. He kept fighting the page like it owed him something. That meant something to Grace. She did not know the word for it yet, but she recognized it. Determination that lives underneath defeat. The refusal to stop even when stopping would be easier. She almost left it alone. She almost walked past. She had her own grief to carry, her own loneliness, her own quiet survival. But then she heard her mother's voice. Not literally, not like a ghost, like a memory. That line from the notebook. The only thing worth leaving behind is someone better off because they knew you. And Grace picked up her bag, walked across the library, and sat down at his table. Nobody ever sat near Nate on purpose. So when a girl with brown hair and tired eyes pulled out the chair across from him and sat down like it was the most natural thing in the world, he flinched, looked up, looked confused, looked suspicious. Every instinct he had was scanning for the trap. People did not approach him with kindness. People approached him with pity or cruelty or indifference, and he had learned to brace for all 3. "That book's boring," she said. "I read it in 3rd grade. The ending's terrible." Nate said nothing. "I'm Grace. "You're in Mrs. Weber's class, right?" He nodded. "Once. Do you want me to read it to you? I'm a really fast reader." His face tightened. Shame. The kind of shame that sits in your chest like a stone and makes you want to disappear. Because he knew what she was really saying. She was saying she knew he could not read. She was saying she had noticed. "I can read." His voice was hoarse, quiet, like it had not been used in a while. "I didn't say you couldn't. I said the book's boring. It's better out loud." She did not wait for permission. She opened the book, turned to where his bookmark sat, and started reading. Not slowly, not in a babying voice, not in the way adults read to children when they are trying to teach. She read naturally, warmly, the way her mother used to read to her at bedtime. Out loud, with feeling, like the words mattered. Nate listened, his shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched. For 12 minutes, he sat completely still, absorbing every word. And something happened in that silence that neither of them could have named. A door opened, not a locked one, a forgotten one. A door that nobody had tried because nobody thought there was anything worth finding on the other side. When the librarian announced closing time, Grace stopped mid-sentence. "I'll finish tomorrow if you're here," she said. Nate looked at her, really looked, not with suspicion this time, with something closer to confusion, like he was trying to solve an equation that did not make sense. "Why?" he asked. "Because I like reading out loud and nobody else listens." It was not pity. It was not charity. It was a girl who missed reading to someone, and a boy who had never been read to. That was the beginning. Grace came to the library every day after that. Not just Tuesdays and Thursdays, which had been her routine. Every single day. She would arrive at 3:30 and find Nate already sitting at the same back table, book open, waiting. She never commented on it, never said, "Oh, you're here again," or "I'm glad you came." She just sat down, opened whatever they were reading, and picked up where they had left off. As if this were the most normal thing in the world. As if two lonely children meeting in a crumbling library to read stories about people doing brave things was just what happened on a Tuesday afternoon in Brenton, Pennsylvania. The first 2 weeks, Grace just read to him. Chapter books, adventure stories, tales of kids sailing across oceans and climbing mountains and outsmarting villains. Nothing educational, nothing that felt like homework, just stories. And Nate listened with the intensity of a person hearing music for the first time after years of silence. He leaned forward, his eyes tracked her face as she read, not the page. He was hearing words the way they were supposed to sound, full and alive and connected, not the broken fragments he wrestled from pages on his own. But Grace was her mother's daughter. She was watching. Even while she read, some part of her was observing Nate. She noticed how his eyes moved across the page when she pointed to a line, how they snagged on certain letters, reversed others, jumped between lines like a needle skipping on a record. She noticed he mixed up B and D every time. He saw was as saw. He lost his place constantly. Grace did not know the word dyslexia. She had never heard it. She just knew that his eyes worked differently, and that the difference was not stupidity. It was something else, something that had a shape and a pattern, which meant it had a solution. Week 3, she started something new. While reading aloud, she would stop and point to a word on the page. "You read this one." Short words at first. The, and, but. Words that even scrambled letters could not disguise. Nate would say them, and Grace would nod and keep going. No praise, no applause, no good job. Just a nod, just acknowledgement. Just the quiet message that he had done something right and they could both move on. Week 4, longer words. Grace began tracing the letters with her finger as she said them, anchoring the shapes to sounds. She would press her fingertip under each letter and say it slowly while Nate watched. She was teaching his eyes to follow a path. She was giving his brain a track to run on. She did not know she was reinventing phonics. She did not know that what she was doing intuitively, a trained specialist would have done with charts and assessments and weeks of planning. She was just doing what felt right. Week 5 changed everything. Grace brought one of her mother's notebooks. She set it on the table between them, and Nate looked at it the way he looked at everything new, with caution. "This was my mom's," Grace said. "She wrote everything she learned in here. She always said writing it down makes it yours." She opened to a blank page in the back. "Let's make your own section." That afternoon, Grace wrote a word on the page. Nate copied it underneath. She wrote another. He copied it. They did this for an hour, side by side, the scratch of pencils the only sound in the back of the library. When Nate looked at his own handwriting forming real words, something shifted in his face. The smallest crack in the wall he had built around himself. Not a smile, not yet. But the absence of the thing that had been there before, the tightness, the bracing. For one moment, he was not defending himself. He was just a boy looking at a word he had written. "I wrote that," he said. "You did. It's right. It's perfect." He stared at the page. Then he asked, so quiet Grace barely heard it, "Can I take the notebook home?" And here is where the story turns. Here is where Grace Holloway, at 11 years old, faced a choice that most adults never have to make. Those notebooks were her mother's. They were all she had left of Catherine. In every page was a conversation with a woman who was gone. Every line of handwriting was proof that her mother had existed, had thought, had loved, had wanted more. Giving away a notebook meant giving away a piece of her mother. It meant having one less voice to hear at night when the house was quiet and the grief was loud. But Grace looked at Nate's face, and she saw what she had seen in those first days at the library. A boy dying, not from hunger, though the Dunlops barely fed him. Not from cold, though winter was coming. From invisibility. From being told by every system and every adult and every sideways glance in a hallway that he was nothing. That he would always be nothing. That the world had already decided what he was worth, and the answer was not much. Grace closed the notebook, placed it in his hands. "Keep it, fill it up. When it's full, I'll give you another one." Nate clutched that notebook like a life raft, like the first solid thing he had touched in years. And that night, in the Dunlop's spare room, under a thin blanket, using a flashlight he had stolen from the kitchen junk drawer, Nathaniel Carter opened the notebook and began to write, one word at a time, one letter at a time, slowly, painfully, beautifully. The library sessions were not free, not for Grace. There is a cost to caring about someone in a world that has decided not to care, and the cost is paid in small amounts every day until you realize you have given more than you knew you had. Grace started arriving home later. Her father, Dale, on the rare evenings he was home, noticed. "Where have you been?" "The library." "Every day?" "I like reading." Dale let it go. He was too exhausted to push. He was working 12-hour shifts 6 days a week, driving 40 minutes each way in a car that needed repairs he could not afford, coming home to a dark house that still smelled like his dead wife's perfume. He did not have the energy to investigate his daughter's library habit. He trusted her because trusting her was easier than the alternative, and sometimes exhaustion looks like faith. At school, the consequences were more visible. The other kids noticed. A girl named Bethany Marsh, the closest thing Grace had to a social peer, confronted her in the hallway. "Why do you hang out with that weird foster kid?" "We read together." "He's dumb, Grace. Everyone says so. He can't even read." "He's learning. You're going to catch whatever he has." Grace said nothing. She walked away. By November, Grace was fully isolated. The few kids who had been neutral toward her now actively avoided her. "Grace hangs out with the foster kid. She's weird." The whispers followed her down every hallway, sat beside her at every lunch table, walked behind her on every route home. But this was a price Grace had already calculated and already accepted. She had nothing socially to begin with. She had no best friend, no group, no birthday party invitations. Losing nothing is easy. You cannot fall off the floor. The harder cost was physical. Winter came early that year. Brenton winters were vicious. Damp cold that cut through coats and settled in your bones. Ice on every sidewalk. Dark by 4:30 in the afternoon. Nate's coat was a thin hoodie. Grace noticed in November. His hands were red and cracked. His lips were split and bleeding. He shivered the entire walk from school to the library. And when he sat down at their table, his fingers were so stiff he could barely hold a pencil. Grace brought her father's old work jacket the next day. Too big for Nate, but warm, lined with flannel. The kind of jacket that feels like being held. "Where'd you get this?" Nate asked. "My dad doesn't use it anymore." A lie? Dale wore that jacket every morning. Grace had taken it from the hall closet before dawn, and she knew she would have to explain if he noticed. He did not notice for 2 weeks. When he did, Grace told him she had lost it at school. He sighed, too tired to be angry. He wore an extra sweater to work instead, and Grace carried the guilt of that small lie for months afterward. But she carried it willingly because Nate was warm. She also began bringing food. She packed her own school lunch larger, then split it at the library, a sandwich cut in half, an apple sliced down the middle, a bag of chips divided evenly between them. Grace was already thin. Her father kept the fridge stocked with basics, but meals were simple and portions were small. By December, Grace had lost weight she could not afford to lose. Her teacher, Mrs. Weber, noticed and sent a note home. Dale was confused. He was buying groceries. Where was the food going? Grace never told him. By December, Nate had filled the first notebook. 62 pages of words, short sentences, attempts at paragraphs. The handwriting was uneven, the spelling imperfect, but the progress was staggering. In 2 months, Grace had done what 3 schools and 5 teachers had not bothered to attempt. She had met Nate exactly where he was and walked forward with him, step by step, without judgment, without tests, without labels, without the system's vocabulary of deficiency and disorder. She just sat beside him and believed he could do it, and somehow that belief was enough to make it true. Grace gave him a second notebook, then a third. Each one was her mother's. Each one cost her something irreplaceable. Each time she handed one over, she felt the weight of what she was letting go. Another set of her mother's handwritten poems. Another collection of vocabulary words. Another piece of the woman who had taught her that the only thing worth leaving behind is someone better off because they knew you. Grace was living that sentence now. She was becoming it. But something remarkable was happening inside those notebooks. Nate was not just copying words anymore. He was writing his own, short entries at first. Today Grace read to me about a boy who sailed across the ocean, then longer ones. I think about my mom sometimes. She used to sing to me. I can't remember the words, but I remember how it felt. Grace read every entry. She never corrected the spelling, never criticized. She just wrote responses underneath in her careful handwriting, little notes of encouragement. That's beautiful. And Nate, your mom sounds wonderful. Keep writing. You have important things to say. These small notes, written in pencil on lined paper in a dead woman's notebook, were the first time anyone had told Nathaniel Carter that what he thought mattered, that his words had weight, that the inside of his mind was worth recording. One evening in January, the librarian, Mrs. Alderman, pulled Grace aside. Grace tensed. She had been careful to follow the rules. She had not been loud. She had not stayed past closing. She braced for a reprimand. "I see what you're doing with that boy." Grace's stomach dropped. "Don't stop," Mrs. Alderman said. "He's learning faster than any tutor could teach him. You're giving him something no program can give, someone who believes in him." Mrs. Alderman started leaving extra supplies at their table after that. Pencils, fresh notebooks, bookmarks. She extended their time by 15 minutes each evening, pretending not to notice when they stayed past closing. She never reported them, never interfered, never tried to formalize or supervise what Grace was doing. She just saw it, recognized it, and cleared the path. One adult, one act of quiet support. It was enough to keep the whole thing going. And then, in February, the system did what the system does. It intervened. The Dunlops received notice that Nate was being reassessed by child services. His school performance had not improved on paper. His teachers saw no change because the change was happening at a library table, not in a classroom. The file said what it had always said: behavioral problem, intellectually deficient, not responding to current placement. The caseworker, a woman with 47 open cases and not enough hours in the day to care about any of them deeply, recommended transfer to a group facility in Pittsburgh, a larger institution, more resources supposedly. In reality, a warehouse for kids the system had written off, a place where difficult children were sent not to get better, but to stop being someone else's problem. Nate found out on a Tuesday. He came to the library that afternoon and could not speak. Grace read to him for an hour before he said a word. His silence was different this time, not the usual quiet. This was the silence of something collapsing inward. "They're moving me." Grace's blood went cold. "When?" "End of the month." "Where?" "Pittsburgh, some group home." Grace gripped the table. "You can't go. You're learning. You're getting better." Nate's voice was flat. Dead. The voice of a child who had been moved before and knew what it meant. "Doesn't matter. Nobody asked me. I'll talk to someone. Mrs. Alderman, maybe she can..." Grace, Nate looked at her. Nobody cares. They never care. I care. The words hung in the air between them. Two small words in a big empty library. And Nate said quietly, as if he were confessing a truth he wished were not true, I know, that's the problem. You're the only one. How would you have handled that? If you were 11 years old and the only person you had been able to help, the only person who made the loneliness feel less permanent, was about to be taken away by a system that did not care whether he lived or died, what would you have done? Grace went home that night and did something she had never done. She opened her mother's notebooks. All of them. Every single one. She read every page. Not for comfort this time. For an answer. She was looking for what Catherine would have done, what her mother would have said if she could sit at the kitchen table one more time and tell her daughter how to survive this. She found it in notebook number 7, a passage her mother had copied from somewhere. The measure of a life is not what you kept, but what you gave away that someone else needed more. Grace read it 3 times. Then she closed the notebook. Then she made a decision that would shape the next 22 years of 2 lives. The next afternoon, she walked into the library carrying her school bag, heavier than usual. She sat down across from Nate and placed 7 notebooks on the table between them, all of them, every remaining notebook her mother had ever written in, and her entire inheritance, the only tangible proof that Catherine Holloway had lived, thought, dreamed, and loved. What's this? Nate asked. These are my mom's notebooks, all of them. I want you to have them. Nate's eyes went wide. Grace, I can't. These are your mom's. My mom would want you to have them. She wrote that the only thing worth leaving behind is someone better off because they knew you. I'm leaving these behind for you. But they're all you have of her. No. Grace's voice was steady even though her heart was breaking. I have her in my head. I have everything she taught me. But you need these more. When you get to Pittsburgh, when you're alone, you read them. You hear her voice. You keep writing in them. You fill them up. Nate held the notebooks like they were made of glass. 7 of them. A dead woman's words. A living girl's heart. Everything Grace had left in this world that connected her to her mother. And she was giving it to a boy who could barely write his own name 6 months ago. And Nate, promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll keep reading. Keep writing. Don't let them tell you you're stupid. You're not. You're the smartest person I know. You just learn differently. Nate's tears fell onto the notebook covers. Promise me, Grace said. I promise. And one day, when you've made it, when you've proven them all wrong, come find me. Nate wiped his face. I'll come find you. I'll come back and I'll show you every notebook, filled up, every single one. Grace pulled a pencil from her bag, an old yellow number 2 pencil, chewed at the eraser, sharpened down to 4 inches. Her mother's pencil. The one Catherine Holloway had used to write in every notebook. Grace held it in both hands and broke it in half. The snap was small and sharp in the quiet library. She gave one half to Nate, kept the other. So we remember, she said. Nate closed his fist around the half pencil. I'll never lose it. Neither will I. They stood there, 2 children in a library that smelled like old carpet and radiator heat, holding half a pencil each. The late afternoon light came through the dirty windows and fell across the table where they had spent 5 months reading, writing, becoming something to each other that neither had a word for yet. Nate looked at the stack of notebooks in his arms. 7 of them. Everything. Grace? Yeah? I'm going to fill every page, every single one. And when I do, when I've read every word your mom wrote and filled every blank page she left, I'm going to come back and marry you. Grace laughed, a real laugh, surprised and sad and warm all at once. You're 10, Nate. You don't even know what marriage means. I know what it means. It means you don't leave. Grace stopped laughing. She looked at this boy who had lost everyone, who had been left by every person and every system that was supposed to hold him. His mother died. His foster family sent him back. His teachers wrote him off. His caseworker was shipping him to Pittsburgh. Everyone left. Everyone always left. And she understood, with a clarity that hit her like cold water, exactly what he was saying. Marriage was not romance to a 10-year-old foster kid. It was the opposite of abandonment. It was a promise to stay. The most sacred thing he could think of. The only forever he knew how to name. Okay, she whispered. Fill every page, then come find me. "I will. Promise?" "I promise." 3 days later, Nate was gone. No goodbye at school, no forwarding address, just an empty desk in Mrs. Weber's class and a girl who stared at it for the rest of the year. The librarian, Mrs. Alderman, found Grace sitting at their table that Thursday afternoon, alone, reading to an empty chair. She did not say anything. She just left a fresh pencil on the table and walked away. The group home in Pittsburgh was everything Grace feared. It was called Keystone Youth Services, and the name made it sound like a summer camp. It was not a summer camp. It was a converted warehouse on the east side of the city, divided into dormitories by plywood walls that did not reach the ceiling. Nate shared a room with 3 other boys. The lights went out at 9. The food was institutional, gray meat on beige trays. The staff were burned out before they started, cycling through like seasonal workers, never staying long enough to learn anyone's name. Hope was not on the menu, but Nate had the notebooks. Every night, after lights out, under the thin blanket, using a flashlight he had stolen from the supply closet, Nate opened Catherine Holloway's notebooks and read her poems, her observations, her vocabulary lists, her copied passages from Emerson and Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou and James Baldwin. A woman he had never met was educating him from beyond the grave, and her daughter's pencil marks in the margins felt like a hand on his shoulder. As Grace had written notes throughout the notebooks, little messages. "This one's my favorite. Mom underlined this 3 times. She must have loved it. Read this one out loud. It sounds better that way." These notes became Grace's voice in the dark. When the other boys snored and the pipes clanged and the city noise pressed against the windows, Nate read Catherine's words and heard Grace's voice and felt, for a few minutes each night, less alone. And he wrote. Every day, he filled the blank pages Grace had left for him with his own words, his own thoughts, his own growing understanding of how language works. Short entries at first, vocabulary words he was learning, sentences about his day, then paragraphs, then pages. His dyslexia did not vanish, it never would, but the notebooks gave him a system, a way to anchor words to meaning, to slow down and build sentences the way you build a wall, one brick at a time, checking each one before placing the next. The notebooks were not a cure. They were a discipline. They were proof that progress is possible if someone gives you the right tools and enough faith to use them. By 15, Nate could read at grade level. By 16, he was reading above it. A teacher at his public high school in Pittsburgh, a woman named Sandra Okafor, noticed his writing and pulled him aside. She had read an essay he submitted for English class. It was rough around the edges, misspelled in places, structurally imperfect, but it had something that could not be taught: voice, authenticity, the kind of raw power that comes from a person who has lived what they are writing about. "Who taught you to write like this?" she asked. Nate thought about it for a long time. A girl in a library. Sandra Okafor became the second person to believe in Nathaniel Carter. She pushed him toward a GED program, then community college, then a transfer to Penn State on a diversity scholarship. Nate studied business, not because he loved spreadsheets and profit margins, but because he understood something fundamental about the world. Money was the language of power, and power was the only thing that could change the systems that had nearly destroyed him. If he wanted to go back and fix what was broken, he needed to speak the language that broken things respond to. He needed capital. He needed authority. He needed a seat at the table where decisions were made about children like him. He graduated at 22, got a job at a consulting firm in Philadelphia. Nate worked 18-hour days, was promoted 3 times in 2 years, started his own company at 26, a firm called Cornerstone Development that specialized in exactly one thing: revitalizing distressed communities, buying neglected properties in struggling towns, the kind of towns the world had given up on, and turning them into affordable housing and commercial space. By 32, Nathaniel Carter was worth $47 million. His company operated in 11 states. Forbes profiled him. CNBC interviewed him. He sat on panels and gave keynotes and shook hands with senators. And every morning, before the first meeting, before the first email, before the espresso machine in his Philadelphia office finished its cycle, Nate opened a drawer in his desk, looked at a half pencil in a glass case, and heard the same voice. A girl in a library. Fill every page, then come find me. He had filled every page by the time he was 16. 7 notebooks, both sides, Every blank space Catherine Holloway had left, he had claimed. And he had kept going. New notebooks, dozens of them, filled with ideas, plans, reflections, the architecture of the life he was building. But the promise was not about paper. It was about becoming someone worthy of going back, worthy of the wild thing he had said to an 11-year-old girl who laughed and told him he did not know what marriage means. He knew what it meant. It means you don't leave. Where is she? He had been searching for Grace Holloway for 5 years. Private investigators, database searches, public records, nothing. Holloway was common enough. Grace Holloway returned hundreds of results. Her father had left Brenton sometime after 2009, no forwarding address. The house on Pershing Road had been foreclosed. The library had closed in 2012, its doors locked, its books boxed up and sent to a county storage facility. Mrs. Alderman had passed away in 2015. Every trail went cold. Every lead dissolved. His investigators told him what investigators tell people when they have exhausted every option. She may not want to be found. Nate refused to believe that. His business partner, James Whitfield, confronted him about it regularly. James was the practical one, the numbers person, the man who looked at spreadsheets the way artists look at canvases. And the numbers on Brenton, Pennsylvania made no sense. There's no ROI in Brenton for a decade. Why are you pouring capital into a ghost town? Nate had bought 14 buildings within a 2-mile radius of the old library. Shells of buildings in a town where the population was shrinking and the tax base was collapsing, and no rational investor would put a single dollar. I have my reasons, Nate said. This is about that girl, isn't it? The one from the library. Nate's jaw tightened. Drop it. Maybe she doesn't want to be found. I said drop it. But James was not wrong to ask. It was irrational. By any business metric, Brenton was a hole you poured money into and never got it back. But Nate's logic was not business logic. It was something deeper and more stubborn. If Grace was still anywhere in western Pennsylvania, she would be in a place where people needed help. That was who she was. That was who she had always been. A person who walked toward need instead of away from it. So Nate would build something worth walking toward. He would rebuild the town. He would create jobs, housing, services, a reason for someone like Grace to appear. And he would be there, waiting. It was obsessive. It was irrational. It was the most rational thing he had ever done. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who is truly following this story. Now, let me tell you about Grace's 22 years. Because while Nate was building an empire and searching for her, Grace was building something too. Something quieter. Something that did not make Forbes or get covered by CNBC. Something that mattered just as much. After Nate left, Grace finished elementary school, middle school, high school, all in Brenton, all quietly. She graduated 17th in a class of 83, good enough for a partial scholarship to Slippery Rock University, not good enough for anyone to notice. She studied social work. Of course she did. What else would she study? She had spent 5 months teaching a foster kid to read in a library. She had seen what the system did to children it was supposed to protect. She had watched Nate get labeled, dismissed, transferred, and shipped off like a package nobody wanted to sign for. Social work was not a career choice for Grace. It was a calling that had already claimed her. Her father, Dale, had a heart attack during her sophomore year. He survived, but he could not work anymore. The warehouse job that had kept them afloat was gone. Grace transferred to a cheaper program, took night classes, worked days at a residential care facility for foster youth, changing sheets and filling out incident reports and sitting with kids who screamed in their sleep because the things that had happened to them did not stop happening just because the lights went out. She saw Nate in every single one of them. Every kid who sat in a corner and said nothing. Every kid who could not read but had never been tested. Every kid the system had labeled instead of listened to. She graduated at 24 with $68,000 in student loan debt and a degree that qualified her for jobs starting at $34,000 a year. She moved back to Brenton because her father needed her and because rent was cheap in a town that was dying. She got a job at the Allegheny County Family Services Office. It's where she learned that the system was even worse from the inside than it looked from the outside. 47 open cases, not enough time for any of them. Paperwork that multiplied like a virus. Children who needed hours of attention getting 15-minute check-ins. She transferred to a nonprofit called Bridge Forward that served foster youth and families in crisis across the region. Better work, still underpaid, still not enough resources. But at least she could look the families in the eye and tell them the truth instead of reading from a script. By 33, Grace Holloway was the deputy director of Bridge Forward's Western Pennsylvania chapter. She managed a staff of 6, oversaw programs for 200 families, wrote grants, testified before county boards, drove her 12-year-old Honda Civic to home visits across 3 counties, sometimes 4 in a day, eating granola bars in the car between appointments. She made $52,000 a year and still owed $41,000 in student loans. She lived in a small apartment above a hardware store in Brenton. The apartment had 1 bedroom, a kitchen with a window that did not close all the way, and a radiator that clanked so loudly in winter that she had learned to sleep through it, the way people near train tracks learn to sleep through trains. She kept a half pencil and a locket around her neck. She never took it off, not once, not in 22 years. She thought about Nate every single day, not romantically, not at first. She thought about him the way you think about a question you never got the answer to, a book you started but never finished. Did he make it? Did the notebooks help? Did anyone ever see him the way she had? Did he fill every page like he promised? Did he remember the wild thing he had said? The word marry, spoken by a 10-year-old boy who just meant, I won't leave you? She had searched for him too, but she did not have private investigators or databases or hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on the search. She had Google and a prayer. Nathaniel Carter returned 1 million results. She scrolled through them. Business profiles, social media accounts, none of them matched. She never connected the boy from the library with the CEO on the Forbes list. Why would she? The Nate she knew was a skinny, silent 10-year-old in a hoodie. The man on Forbes was a confident executive in a tailored suit. Different world, different name almost. She stopped searching at 28, told herself it was enough to hope he was alive, told herself that the notebooks had done their work, told herself that wherever he was, Catherine's words were with him, and that was a kind of survival too. Brenton's population had dropped to 4,100 by September of 2025. But something strange was happening. Buildings were being bought. Properties that had sat empty for a decade were suddenly under renovation. A development company called Cornerstone had filed permits for affordable housing, a community center, and a small business incubator. The town was suspicious. They had heard promises before. Developers came through dying towns like tourists through museums, looked at the bones, imagined what they could build, made presentations full of beautiful renderings, and then disappeared when the numbers did not work. Brenton had been promised 3 revivals in 10 years. None had materialized. The people who remained had learned to distrust hope because hope in Brenton had a habit of showing up in a nice suit and leaving in the middle of the night. A town hall meeting was scheduled for September 18th at the Brenton VFW Hall. The developer had been invited to present. Grace Holloway was there because Bridge Forward served families in Brenton, and any development would affect her clients. She needed to know what was coming. She needed to know whether this was real or another performance. She arrived at 6:45, sat in the 3rd row with a legal pad and a pen. The room was half full, maybe 60 people, retirees in flannel shirts, young families with strollers, a few local business owners who had survived by stubbornness alone, a reporter from the county paper. The VFW hall smelled like coffee and floor wax and decades of Friday night fish fries, American flags on the walls, folding chairs arranged in rows, a projector set up at the front. At 6:55, a man walked in, tall, well-built, black, wearing a suit that cost more than Grace's monthly rent. He carried himself with quiet authority, but looked uncomfortable, the way people look when they are somewhere important and know that the room has already decided what it thinks of them. His eyes swept the space like he was searching for something. Not a seat. Something specific, something he was afraid he would not find. Grace noticed him the way she noticed everyone. Observed, filed away, moved on. Dorothy Brennan, the town council president, a woman in her 60s with white hair and a voice that did not need a microphone, called the meeting to order. Cornerstone Development has proposed a $30 million revitalization plan for Brenton. Tonight, their CEO will present his plans. Then we ask questions. Real questions. She looked at the man in the suit. "Mr. Carter, the floor is yours." Nate stood, walked to the front. 60 pairs of eyes tracked him. He opened his laptop and projected his plans onto the wall. Beautiful renderings, restored buildings, green spaces, trees where parking lots used to be. "Good evening. My name is Nathaniel Carter. I grew up not far from here. I know what a broken town looks like because I lived in one." That got attention, not much, but a slight shift in the room, the difference between polite listening and actual listening. He laid out the plan. Affordable housing, 65% of units reserved for current residents at below market rates. The old library building, purchased and fully restored, converted into a community learning center with tutoring programs, adult literacy classes, and after-school care. A small business fund for local entrepreneurs. Job training partnerships with regional employers. Total investment, $30 million over 5 years. "I know you don't trust developers," Nate said. "You've been promised things before, but I'm not here to flip your town for profit. I'm here because this town made me who I am, and I owe it a debt." Questions came fast, skeptical, sharp, earned through years of disappointment. A retired steelworker stood up. "What's affordable mean to a millionaire?" Nate did not flinch. "Units priced at 30% of area median income, verified annually, written into the deed restrictions." A young mother near the back. "What about the school? Our kids need resources." "We're partnering with the district on a STEM program and providing $200,000 annually for school enrichment." Then a voice from the third row, clear, professional, steady. "Mr. Carter, your plans look impressive on paper, but I work with families in this community every day. Foster families, single parents, people one paycheck from homelessness. What specific provisions exist for the most vulnerable residents?" Because beautiful buildings mean nothing if the people who need them most get pushed out. Nate turned toward the voice and the room tilted. A white woman, early 30s, natural brown hair pulled back. Professional, but not polished. The kind of person who buys practical clothes and wears them until they wear out. Tired eyes that were also somehow fierce. The eyes of someone who has seen too much suffering and refused to look away. A legal pad clutched in her hands, and something in her voice, something in the way she held herself. The directness. The refusal to be impressed by money. The instinct to speak for people who could not speak for themselves. Nate's heart began to hammer. "That's an important question," he said carefully. "May I ask your name?" "Grace Holloway. I'm the deputy director of Bridge Forward." The room continued, and Nate could not hear it. The sound went out of the world. Grace Holloway. 5 years of investigators. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Database searches in 12 states. And she was sitting in the third row of a VFW hall in the town where it all started. 10 feet away. Right there the whole time. Nate gripped the podium. His knuckles whitened. Dorothy Brennan noticed. "Mr. Carter, are you all right?" "Yes, sorry." He looked at Grace. "Ms. Holloway, you raise exactly the right concern. Can I ask, did you attend school here in Brenton about 22 years ago?" Grace looked confused. "I grew up here, yes. Why?" "Did you spend time at the Brenton Public Library as a child?" The room went quiet. Not because anyone understood what was happening, because they could feel it, the charge in the air. The way both of these people had suddenly stopped breathing. "I practically lived there," Grace said slowly. "How do you know that?" Nate's hands trembled. He had not planned for this. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. In the car, in the shower, in the middle of the night when sleep would not come and the half pencil sat on his nightstand like a compass pointing somewhere he could not follow. He had rehearsed speeches, written letters he never sent, practiced what he would say until the words wore smooth. And now that it was here, now that she was right there, 10 feet away, he could not breathe. Did you ever read to a boy there, a foster kid, black, 10 years old, couldn't read, sat at the back table every day? Grace's legal pad slipped from her fingers. It hit the floor, and the sound was enormous in the silence. It's just a slap of paper on linoleum. Every head in the room turned toward her. Her hand went to her neck, to the locket. The locket she had worn for 22 years. The locket that held half a pencil. "Nate," she whispered. The room did not understand yet, but they felt it. The way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. The way you feel the ground shift before you see the crack. Something was happening between these two people that was bigger than a town hall meeting, bigger than a development plan, bigger than anything that had happened in this VFW hall since the last soldier came home. Nate stepped out from behind the podium. His voice broke. "You gave me your mother's notebooks, all 7 of them. You broke a pencil in half and told me to keep writing." Grace stood, her chair scraped back against the floor. Her eyes filled with tears. "You're alive," she breathed, "because of you. You can read, because of you. You're the Forbes." The pieces fell together like tumblers in a lock. Nathaniel Carter, Cornerstone Development. The boy from the library was the man on the magazine cover. The child who could not read his own name had built a $47 million company. And he was standing in a VFW hall in Brenton, Pennsylvania, because he had been looking for her. "I kept every notebook," Nate said. "I filled every page. I built everything you see on this screen because of what you gave me in that library." Grace was crying now, silent, shaking tears that she did not bother to wipe away, because wiping them would mean acknowledging that she was crying, and she was not ready to acknowledge anything yet. She was still catching up, still processing, still trying to reconcile the 10-year-old boy in the hoodie with the man in the suit. The child she had fed and read to and given her mother's notebooks to was standing 15 feet away, and he had come back. He had actually come back. Dorothy Brennan looked between them. She had run this town for 12 years and had seen a lot of things, but she had never seen a room go this still. "I think we should take a 15-minute break." People filed out slowly, whispering, staring, trying to piece together what they had just witnessed. But Nate and Grace did not move. They stood 15 feet apart in a VFW hall in a dying town, and 22 years collapsed between them like a bridge that had been waiting to be crossed. Grace walked forward. Nate walked forward. They met in the middle. "You came back," Grace said. "I filled every page, Grace. Every single one, just like I promised." Grace's face crumbled. She remembered. A 10-year-old boy holding 7 notebooks, making a wild promise in a library. "I'm going to fill every page and come back and marry you." She had laughed. She had thought it was sweet and impossible, and the kind of thing children say when they do not have the words for what they actually feel. But he had meant it. He had spent 22 years meaning it. Grace reached for her locket, opened it with shaking hands. Inside, the half pencil, worn to 3 inches, yellow paint chipped, eraser gone. She held it up. Nate reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a glass case. Inside, the other half. Same wear, same age, same fracture line. They held the 2 halves together. A perfect match after 22 years. Grace's sob broke free. Not a quiet cry, a sound that came from somewhere deeper than her chest, from the place where she had stored 22 years of wondering, 22 years of hoping, 22 years of lying awake at night, touching a locket, and asking the darkness whether a boy she had loved was alive. Nate pulled her into his arms. She held him like she had wanted to for 22 years. The boy she saved, the man he became. "Thank you," Nate whispered. "Thank you for seeing me when nobody else did." They did not rush into anything after that. Grace would not allow it. She was careful by nature, deliberate by experience, and she had spent enough years in social work to know that reunions are not the same as relationships. The emotion of that night in the VFW hall was real. But emotion is not a foundation. It is a spark. A spark can light a fire, or it can burn everything down. Grace needed to know which one this was. They sat in her small office at Bridge Forward the next afternoon and talked for 4 hours. The office was cramped. A metal desk, 2 filing cabinets, a window that looked out on a parking lot, motivational posters on the wall that Grace had inherited from the previous tenant and never bothered to take down. Nate told her everything. The group home, the notebooks under the covers, the flashlight, Sandra Okafor noticing his writing, community college, Penn State, the consulting firm, the company, the search, 5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars spent looking for a girl named Grace Holloway in a world full of Grace Holloways. Grace told him her side, her father's heart attack, the student loans, The residential care facility where she changed sheets and sat with screaming children. The years of watching kids fall through the same cracks he had fallen through. The locket. The half pencil she never took off. Not for a shower. Not for a job interview. Not for anything. "I looked for you," she said. "On Google, like an idiot. I never connected you to the CEO. Why would you? Last time you saw me, I was 10 and couldn't read my own name. You could. You just needed someone to sit with you while you figured it out." Silence. The kind of silence that holds everything. "Grace, let me help you. Student loans, your apartment, whatever you need." Grace held up her hand. "No, but I have the resources and I didn't teach you to read so you'd owe me. I did it because it was right, because my mother would have done it." Nate looked at her. He saw the 11-year-old girl who had sat down at his table uninvited and changed his life. She was still the same person, still refusing to take credit, still refusing to be compensated for kindness, still believing that goodness was its own reward, even when the world had given her very little reward for being good. "Then let me help the community. Let me do it right, but I need your help. You know these families. You know what they actually need, not what developers think they need." Grace studied him. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a partnership." "What kind of partnership?" "You design the programs, social services, youth support, family stabilization, everything that goes inside the buildings I construct. I provide funding and infrastructure. You make all programmatic decisions. And if we disagree, you win. You know more than I do." Grace took a week. During that week, Nate did not push. He came to Brenton, met with residents, visited the old library building, walked the streets of his childhood, and Grace watched him from a distance. She watched how he talked to people, whether he listened or performed, whether he remembered their names the second time, whether he treated the retired steelworker with the same respect he treated the county commissioner. He did, every time. At the end of the week, Grace called him. She had conditions, all program staff hired from the communities they serve, an advisory board of foster youth alumni with real decision-making power, and Grace keeps her current caseload at Bridge Forward 1 day a week because she does not leave her people behind. Nate agreed to every condition without hesitation. "Then let's do this," Grace said. The program they built was called the Notebook Project, and it was unlike anything the foster care world had seen before. The concept was Grace's, rooted in what had worked for Nate. Every participant, whether a foster youth aging out, a single mother starting over, or a laid-off worker retraining, received a notebook on their first day. Not a binder of forms, not a packet of resources, not a list of phone numbers to call. A physical composition notebook, identical to the ones Catherine Holloway had filled. Inside the front cover, printed in Grace's handwriting, "The only thing worth leaving behind is someone better off because they knew you." Every participant was paired with a mentor, not a case manager, not a counselor, a mentor, someone who sat with them, listened, helped them write down their goals, their fears, their progress, someone who showed up every week no matter what. "The system fails because it treats people like files," Grace told her staff on the first day. "We're going to treat them like people." The program launched in January with 40 participants. Within 3 months, 37 were still enrolled, a 92% retention rate in a field where 40% was considered a success. The kids came because someone was listening. The kids stayed because someone kept showing up. Marcus Trent, 17 years old, aging out of foster care with no family and no plan. He had been in 7 placements in 9 years. He trusted no one. He expected nothing. When Grace sat down with him for the first time, he crossed his arms and asked the question every foster kid asks when someone new promises to help. "Why should I trust this?" Grace showed him a photo on her phone, a 10-year-old boy in a library. "Because I did this once before and it worked." Marcus enrolled, got his GED, started an apprenticeship in electrical work. 6 months later, he had his own apartment in one of Nate's renovated buildings and a paycheck that covered his bills. He sent Grace a card at Christmas. "Thank you for being the first person who sat with me long enough to hear what I was actually saying." Grace kept that card on her desk next to the half pencil. Meanwhile, Nate was doing something unusual for a CEO worth $47 million. He was present, not sending representatives, not writing checks from Philadelphia. He was in Brenton 3 days a week, all rolling up his sleeves, attending program meetings, talking to participants, learning their names and their stories and their fears. One afternoon, Grace found him sitting with a 14-year-old girl named Keisha who could not read. He was doing exactly what Grace had done for him 22 years earlier, sitting beside her, reading out loud, letting her follow along. Patient, unhurried, kind. Grace watched from the doorway and felt something crack open in her chest. Something she had been protecting for a very long time. Something that had a name she was not ready to say out loud. That evening, walking to her car, Grace shivered. October in Brenton. The cold came early, came hard. Nate took off his coat and put it around her shoulders. "Nate, you'll freeze. I'll be fine." Grace stopped walking. Those exact words, reversed, 22 years later. She had said them to him when she gave him her father's jacket. She had lied. She had shivered through 2 months of recess in a sweater, and now he was doing the same thing, giving without being asked, lying about the cost, putting someone else's comfort before his own. She looked at him. He looked back. He remembered everything. "I'm falling in love with you," Grace said. Not dramatically, not through tears, quietly, honestly, the way she did everything. And it terrifies me. Why? Because you're worth $47 million and I'm a social worker who drives a car that might not start tomorrow. Because you live in a different world. Nate took both her hands. "I built my world to find yours. There's no version of my life that doesn't include you." Grace looked at his hands holding hers, strong, steady, and certain. She thought about the 10-year-old boy who could not write his own name. She thought about the man standing in front of her who had built a company, rebuilt a town, and searched for 5 years to keep a promise he made in a library. And she decided to take one small step forward. "One dinner," she said, "as friends, no promises. As friends. And whatever happens between us, this project continues. You help these people regardless." That was always the plan. Good. Because if you break their trust, I'll dismantle you. Nate smiled. "I believe you." The dinner became 2, then weekly, then something neither of them could define or wanted to. Grace was careful, deliberate, slow to open. She had spent her entire adult life taking care of everyone else. Every ounce of emotional energy she had went to her clients, and to Marcus and Keisha and the 200 families on her caseload. She did not know how to let someone take care of her. She did not know how to receive kindness without immediately calculating what it would cost, who would pay for it, and what would happen when it inevitably stopped. That was what poverty teaches you. That was what loss teaches you. Everything ends. Every good thing has an expiration date. And if you let yourself depend on something that is going to disappear, the disappearance will hurt worse than never having it at all. Nate was patient. He had waited 22 years. He could wait as long as she needed, but he found ways to show her that did not involve money. He learned her coffee order, caramel macchiato, extra shot, light foam. He brought it every morning without being asked, and left it on her desk before she arrived so that it was there when she walked in, as if the coffee had always existed, as if care was just part of the furniture. He memorized the names of every family on her caseload. He stayed late to help with program reports, not because he needed to, but because she needed him to. He never asked for credit, never pointed out what he had done. He just did it, day after day, week after week, building trust the only way trust can be built. Not with grand gestures, with consistency, with showing up, with being exactly who he said he was until the evidence became undeniable and the walls Grace had built around her heart began, slowly, reluctantly, to thin. One evening, Grace's car finally died. Battery, transmission, everything at once. "Let me buy you a car," Nate said. "Absolutely not. A used one, practical." "No." The next morning, the car had been towed to a mechanic and fully repaired, the bill paid anonymously. Grace called Nate. "Was that you?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me." Silence. "Does the car work now?" "Yes." "Then does it matter?" Grace hung up, stood in her kitchen, pressed her hand to her heart. He was exactly who she had hoped he would become. 3 months into whatever they were becoming, Nate invited Grace to his Philadelphia office. She had never been. She walked in overwhelmed by the scale, the view, the polished surfaces of success. "Why am I here? I want to show you something. Sit." Nate opened a cabinet behind his desk. Inside, arranged on a shelf, were 7 composition notebooks, worn, battered, stained, held together with tape and prayer. Catherine Holloway's handwriting on every cover. Grace's hand went to her mouth. "You kept them." "Every single one." Nate picked up the first notebook and opened it. "Your mother's words on the left pages, my words on the right. I filled every blank page she left. Took me 6 years." Grace took the notebook with shaking hands. She saw her mother's handwriting, the vocabulary lists, the copied poems, and across from them, in a child's unsteady hand that grew stronger, page by page, Nate's responses, his first sentences, his first paragraphs, his first essays, every blank page filled, just like he had promised a girl in a library when he was 10 years old. She turned to the back of the last notebook. The final entry, he dated the day Nate started his company. "Grace gave me these notebooks when she had nothing else to give. Her mother filled them with everything she'd learned. I filled them with everything they taught me. Today I start a company. I don't know if it will work, but I know this. Everything I build will be built on what a girl in a library and a woman who never went to college gave me. The words, the belief, the proof that someone saw me and thought I was worth the trouble. I told Grace I'd fill every page and marry her. I've done the first part. Now I have to find her and keep the rest of my promise." Grace was sobbing, not the quiet tears from the VFW hall, something bigger, something that had been held inside for 22 years and was finally breaking free. She was holding her mother's notebooks, the notebooks she had given away when she was 11 because a boy needed them more than she did, and he had kept them. He had kept them and filled them and carried them across 2 decades and 3 states, and a transformation that would have been impossible without them. Nate knelt beside her. "There's one more thing." He pulled up architectural plans on his screen. The Brenton Learning Center, the building that had once been the library where they met. "Look at the dedication plaque." Grace read through tears. "The Catherine Holloway Center for Learning, in memory of a woman who never stopped writing, and for her daughter, who gave away what she treasured most to save a boy she barely knew." Grace could not speak, could not breathe her mother's name. On a building, in the town where Catherine had lived and died, without anyone outside her family knowing she had existed. And now her name would be carved in bronze. Her legacy would outlast the cancer that took her, outlast the poverty that constrained her, outlast every limitation the world had placed on a woman who never went to college but never stopped learning. "Your mother's notebook saved my life," Nate said. "She deserves to have her name on a building." Grace pulled Nate to her, held him, wept into his shoulder. 22 years of wondering, 22 years of hoping, 22 years of praying he was alive. And he had not just survived, he had turned her mother's words into a legacy. "She would have loved you," Grace whispered. "She already saved me, through you." The notebook project grew. Within a year, 211 participants had been served. The model was simple, replicable, and effective. Other towns began calling. Other states began visiting. Nate and Grace formalized the operation into the Notebook Foundation. $10 million seeded by Nate's personal wealth. Grace was named executive director. Salary, $120,000. Full autonomy, staff of 12. "This isn't charity," Nate told her. "This is the hardest job you'll ever have." "I don't have a degree in nonprofit management." "You have something better. You've lived it." Grace accepted, and she was brilliant. Within 18 months, the Notebook Project expanded to 7 cities: Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Detroit, Baltimore, Milwaukee, Gary, Indiana. Each site hired locally, built advisory boards of foster youth alumni, used the same core model: one notebook, one mentor, one person who shows up. The numbers were extraordinary. 847 participants served, 91% retention, 402 in stable housing, 319 in education or job training, 187 employed, 0 chronic homelessness among completers. Marcus Trent completed his electrician certification, got hired full-time at $54,000 a year. His first paycheck, he told Grace later, felt like holding proof that he existed, that the world had room for him, that someone, somewhere, was willing to trade money for what he could do with his hands. He bought groceries first, then a winter coat. Then he sat in his apartment that evening, alone, in a building Nate had renovated, at a kitchen table that belonged to him, and he cried. Not from sadness, from the strangeness of stability, from the unfamiliar weight of a life that was not falling apart. He sent Grace a card. "You're the reason I have a future. Thank you for sitting with me." Keisha Williams, the girl Nate had tutored, graduated high school and enrolled in community college. The girl who could not read a year earlier was writing essays her professors returned with a single word at the top: excellent. She wanted to be a teacher, not a general teacher, a reading specialist. She wanted to sit with children who stared at books like locked doors and show them where the key was hidden. "Mr. Carter showed me that reading isn't about being smart," she told a local reporter. "It's about having someone who doesn't give up on you." Tyler Morrison, 16, had lost both parents in a car accident on a November evening and spent a year not speaking, not silent by choice, silent by devastation. The kind of silence that is not empty but overfull, crammed with grief that has nowhere to go. The program paired him with a mentor named Jerome, who had lost his mother at 14 and understood that some pain cannot be talked around. It can only be sat with. Jerome showed up every week. He did not force Tyler to speak. He did not fill the silence with questions or motivational speeches. He just sat there, present, patient, week after week. Until one afternoon, 6 months in, Tyler picked up a pencil and started writing. His first essay. The subject: "The person who changed my life." He wrote about a stranger at a library table who read out loud to a boy who could not read. He had never met Grace. He had heard the story from Jerome, who had heard it from Nate. The story had traveled through mouths and memories and mentoring sessions in small rooms across 7 cities. The lesson had multiplied in the way that lessons do, when they are true enough to survive the telling. PBS produced a documentary. The Notebooks, a story of what we leave behind. It aired nationally, won a Peabody nomination, changed the conversation about foster care in America. The Pennsylvania state legislature passed the Holloway-Carter Act, increasing funding for youth aging out of foster care by $12 million annually. Nate and Grace testified together. Grace spoke last. 22 years ago, I was an 11-year-old girl who sat down next to a boy in a library because my mother told me the only thing worth leaving behind is someone better off because they knew you. I gave that boy some notebooks. He turned those notebooks into a life. Then he came back and turned that life into a program that helps hundreds. This isn't about money. It's about whether we choose to see the person sitting next to us. That choice costs nothing, and it changes everything. Standing ovation from legislators. At the one-year gala for the Notebook Foundation, 400 people filled a restored ballroom in Brenton. The town that had nearly died was now being written about in The Atlantic and studied by Harvard Business School. Grace stood backstage nervous. Nate found her. "You okay?" "Just thinking about my mom." She'd barely believe this. She'd believe it. She started it. They took the stage together. Nate spoke about the program, the expansion, the future. Then he paused. And when he paused, the room paused with him. None of this exists without one person. When I was 10 years old and the world had thrown me away, Grace Holloway sat down at my table and said, "That book's boring. I'll read it to you." She gave me her mother's notebooks when they were the most valuable thing she owned. She broke a pencil in half and told me to keep writing. She saved my life. The crowd applauded. Nate turned to Grace. 22 years ago, I made you a wild promise. I was 10 years old, holding your mother's notebooks, and I told you I was going to fill every page and come back and marry you." A ripple of emotion moved through the room. 400 people holding their breath. "You laughed," Nate said. "You told me I didn't even know what marriage means." And I said, "It means you don't leave." Grace's hand went to her mouth. "I've filled every page, Grace. I came back, and I still know what marriage means. It means you don't leave." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small box, opened it, Inside, a ring, simple, elegant, set with a small amber stone the color of a pencil. "Grace Holloway, will you marry me?" Grace looked at the ring, looked at Nate, saw the boy in the library, the man at the podium, the 22 years between them, every one of them leading here. "Yes!" The room erupted, standing ovation, tears across 400 faces. They kissed, and the sound of the crowd faded. And for a moment, it was just the two of them, at a back table in a library that did not exist anymore, reading a story that turned out to be their own. The wedding was held at the Catherine Holloway Center for Learning. 100 guests. The same room where Nate had first opened a book with Grace 22 years earlier. The chairs were arranged where the library tables used to be. The altar stood where the back table had been. The table where a girl sat down across from a boy and said, "That book's boring," and changed two lives forever. Red and amber flowers lined the aisle. Sunlight came through the restored windows and fell in long golden rectangles across the floor. The same windows that had been dirty and cracked when Grace and Nate were children, now clean and whole. And there was something in that, and something about restoration that applied to buildings and people equally. Grace's father, Dale, walked her down the aisle. He was 70 now, slower, quieter. His hands were rough from decades of warehouse work, and his back was bent from the heart attack that had nearly taken him. But his eyes were bright, and he held his daughter's arm with the pride of a man who finally understood what she had been doing all those years when she said she was going to the library. He had never known about Nate, not the full story. Not until the reunion at the VFW hall made the county newspaper, and a reporter called his house asking for a comment. Dale had read the article 3 times. Then he had gone to his bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed he had shared with Catherine, and wept. His daughter had been saving a boy's life at 11 years old, and he had been too exhausted and too broken to notice. The guilt was enormous, but Grace, being Grace, had taken his hand and told him the truth. "You kept the lights on, Dad. You kept food in the fridge. You kept showing up, even when showing up was the hardest thing in the world. That's what made it possible for me to show up for someone else. Your mother would be so proud," he whispered as they reached the front. "I know, Dad." Nate stood at the front, crying before she reached him. They exchanged vows. Nate said, "Grace, when I was 10 and the world was dark, you turned on a light. You sat with me. You read to me. You gave me your mother's words when you had nothing left to give. I told you I'd fill every page and marry you. You laughed because we were children, but I wasn't joking. I'm standing here because you chose to see me. I promised to spend every day of my life earning what you gave so freely. I promised to never leave." Grace said, "Nate, you took a box of old notebooks and turned them into a movement. You took a broken pencil and turned it into a foundation. You took a wild promise from a 10-year-old boy and spent 22 years keeping it. But what I love most isn't what you built. It's who you are. You're still the boy at the back table, fighting to read the next page, and I will sit beside you for the rest of my life." The reception spilled through the center. Program participants served as ushers. Marcus Trent gave a toast. "To the couple who taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about who sits down at your table when nobody else will." After the celebration, as the last guests filtered out, Nate and Grace walked through the center, past the tutoring rooms, the computer lab, the reading corner where a new generation of kids sat with mentors every afternoon. They stopped at the entrance. A bronze plaque on the wall bore Catherine Holloway's words. "The only thing worth leaving behind is someone better off because they knew you." And then a girl appeared, 8 years old, black, shy, standing alone near the door, holding a backpack too big for her, staring at the floor. Grace noticed first. She always noticed first. "Hi there, I'm Grace. What's your name?" "Amara, They told me to come here. I don't have anywhere to go tonight." Grace looked at Nate. He looked back. Their hearts broke and soared in the same breath. Because this was the moment the story completed itself. Not with a wedding, not with a ring. Not with 400 people in a ballroom. With a child standing at a door, alone. The way Nate had once been alone. The way every kid they had ever tried to help had once been alone. And two people who knew exactly what that felt like, choosing to do exactly what Grace had done 22 years earlier. Notice, approach, sit down. Grace knelt down. "Come inside, Amara. Let's get you something to eat." Nate reached into his jacket, pulled out a composition notebook, fresh, blank, full of possibility. He held it out to Amara. "Keep this. Write in it every day, whatever you're thinking, whatever you're feeling. And if you ever need someone to sit with you while you figure it out, we're here. Amara took the notebook, held it tight. Why are you helping me? Grace touched the locket at her neck, the half pencil inside. Because someone once sat with him, she pointed to Nate, in a library, and it changed everything. Amara looked at the notebook, looked at them. Something in her face shifted, not hope exactly, not yet, but the space where hope could land. She walked inside. Behind her, Grace and Nate followed, hand in hand, and on the wall of the Catherine Holloway Center, past the plaque, past the photographs, past the bulletin board, where 847 names were pinned beside 847 notebook covers, the evening light caught a glass case mounted by the door. Inside it, two halves of a broken pencil, placed together, touching, made whole. The Notebook Project has served 847 individuals in 7 cities across the United States. The model has been adopted in 34 communities nationwide. Nathaniel and Grace Carter continue to lead the foundation together from Brenton, Pennsylvania. They are expecting their first child, a daughter. They plan to name her Catherine. If you are watching this and you feel invisible right now, if you are struggling, if nobody seems to see you, hold on. Your Grace is coming. Your Nate is coming. Someone out there will sit down at your table. And if you are watching this and you have something to give, even something small, even something that costs you, give it. A notebook, a meal, an hour of your time, a willingness to sit with someone and not look away. You never know whose life you will rewrite. Grace Holloway gave a boy her mother's notebooks when they were the only thing she had left. He promised to fill every page and marry her. She laughed because they were children, but he was not joking. He filled every page. Then he filled 1,000 more. Then he came back. Then he kept his promise. What will you give? What story will you start? Her mother wrote it best. The only thing worth leaving behind is someone better off because they knew you. Be that thing someone leaves behind. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you believe that small acts of kindness are not small at all. And leave a comment telling me about a time when someone sat down at your table when nobody else would. I read every single one, and I promise you, your story matters as much as this one. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.